I stepped onto the subway car, its doors hissing shut behind me. The air was stuffy, though bearable, a peculiar blend of metal and weary bodies. Scanning the interior, I found an empty seat between a man engrossed in a book and a woman lost in music, her earbuds nestled securely in place. I made my way there, carefully avoiding eye contact with the other passengers, each equally absorbed in their own worlds. The seat was firm, if somewhat worn, its fabric a testament to countless journeys. Above, fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow, highlighting the scratched windows and faded advertisements. My bag settled onto my lap, and I leaned back, preparing for the ride. Across from me, a teenager furiously tapped away at his phone, completely immersed in a video game. Beside him, a mother sat quietly, her baby sleeping soundly in a stroller, oblivious to the world outside. At the far end of the car, a couple, likely in their late 30s, conversed in hushed tones. The train lurched forward, the hum of its engine filling the space, punctuated by the rhythmic clack of wheels on tracks. Overhead, a speaker crackled to life. The conductor's monotonous announcement of the next station blended seamlessly into the ambient noise. I glanced at the digital clock near the door. 11:42 p.m. A stark reminder of the lateness of the hour. Outside, the world blurred into a hypnotic spectacle of dark tunnels and fleeting lights. The rhythmic swaying of the train car soothed my body, weary from a long day of spreadsheets, meetings, and office politics. My muscles relaxed, my shoulders slumped, and my mind began to drift. I told myself to stay awake, to remain alert for my stop, but a wave of fatigue washed over me, making the task seem monumental. My eyes, heavy with sleep, started to close despite my best efforts. The boundaries between awareness and slumber blurred, and within moments, I succumbed to sleep, my head tilting forward slightly. I woke with a jolt. My first instinct was to look around. The subway car was empty. The vacant seats stared back at me like a row of vacant eyes. Overhead, the lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the car's interior. Turning to the window, I saw a station that was unsettlingly unfamiliar. The walls, once vibrantly colored, were marred by peeling paint and stains of unclear origin. A thick layer of dust covered the tiled floor, suggesting years of neglect. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling corners. The station's name was unreadable. The letters were either scraped off or completely faded. A wave of dread washed over me, chilling me to the bone. With a shaky hand, I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, but the signal bars were dishearteningly absent. My battery level read 23%, adding to my growing list of concerns. Next to the unreadable station sign, a map sat encased in a cracked glass frame. I stood and walked towards it, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The scratched glass distorted the map almost beyond recognition. Even the ticketing machines were covered in graffiti, their screens dark and unresponsive. Across the tracks, on the opposite platform, a booth, once likely for station attendants, sat with a shattered window and an overturned chair. A clock on the wall behind it was frozen at an impossible time. The entire setting screamed abandonment. The air was stale, thick with a musty odor. I looked for an exit, spotting stairs leading upward. However, a chained and padlocked gate, topped with a rusted closed sign, blocked my way. I was completely alone, cut off from any help or communication. My senses sharpened, my ears straining for any sound beyond the low hum of the flickering lights and my own breath. Summoning my resolve, I took a deep breath and decided to leave the empty train car. The thought that the station might be undergoing renovations offered a glimmer of hope, a possible explanation for its dilapidated state. My shoes hit the platform with a dull thud, the sound oddly loud in the deserted space. I glanced left and right before spotting what appeared to be an information map, barely visible through layers of grime and dust. With cautious steps, I approached, my eyes fixed on its tarnished glass cover. My fingers brushed away layers of dust, revealing a faded surface beneath. The lines and text were either too light to read or smeared into an illegible mess. It offered no useful information. In the distance, I spotted a figure resembling a janitor. My heart lifted momentarily. He was focused on sweeping an area of the floor that seemed no dirtier than the rest, meticulously avoiding heaps of trash and debris scattered around him. Sensing an opportunity, I raised my voice. "Excuse me. Could you tell me where we are? I'm not sure how I got here." To my astonishment, the man didn't respond, didn't even lift his head. He continued sweeping as if I hadn't spoken, as if I wasn't even there. A cold sensation crept up my spine, intensifying the unease I already felt. Torn between staying near the indifferent janitor and returning to the relative safety of the train, I opted for the latter. But as I turned, I heard the unmistakable sound of the train's doors closing. My heart sank. I quickened my pace, desperate to board before it departed. My efforts were in vain. I arrived just in time to see the train pulling away, its wheels screeching loudly against the metal tracks. The sound reverberated through the station, then faded, leaving me alone once more. The sinking feeling in my stomach grew heavier, solidifying my fear and confusion. I was stranded, in a place that defied explanation, with no visible means of escape or communication. My options were dwindling fast. The silence left in the wake of the departing train amplified my sense of isolation. Pulling myself together, I decided the best course of action was to leave the train and gather information. Perhaps, I told myself, this was a station under repair. Clinging to this shred of hope, I approached what appeared to be a station map. The glass protecting it was filthy. Years of grime had accumulated. Using my jacket sleeve, I wiped away the dirt, hoping for a clearer view. Unfortunately, the map offered no help. Its colors were washed out, and key areas appeared deliberately scratched or defaced. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a figure at the far end of the platform, a janitor, complete with a push broom and a faded uniform. Oddly, he was sweeping a spot that was already relatively clean, completely disregarding the heaps of trash scattered around the station. My heart lifted momentarily at the sight of another human being. "Excuse me," I shouted, my voice tinged with a mix of relief and urgency. "Could you tell me where we are? I'm lost and could use some help." The figure didn't acknowledge me. He continued his sweeping with a mechanical persistence that sent a chill down my spine. It was as if I'd spoken into a void, my words dissipating into the stagnant air. A loud mechanical groan interrupted my thoughts. I turned around just in time to see the train's doors close. Panic surged through me. I raced back towards the train, frantically waving my arms and yelling, "Wait! Stop!" But it was too late. The train started to move, its wheels screeching against the rails as it picked up speed, drowning out my shouts. The sound resonated in the empty station, echoing off the decrepit walls, blending with the flickering lights and casting transient shadows. I stood there, frozen, as the last car disappeared into the pitch-black tunnel ahead. The station plunged back into an unsettling silence. save for the distant hum of electricity flowing through the overhead lines. With a deep sigh, I diverted my gaze to explore other options. I spotted a staircase that seemed to lead to an exit. Each step creaked under my weight as I ascended, the sound echoing in the hollow space. My hopes dwindled when I reached the top and found a metal gate securely locked with a hefty padlock and chain. Of course it is, I muttered to myself, a feeling of despair settling in. Retracing my steps, I returned to the platform and plopped down onto a bench, its several missing wooden slats making it an uncomfortable perch. The emptiness was almost tangible, like a thick fog that drowned out all hope. The reality hit me. I was isolated, cut off from the world I knew, and utterly lost. Feeling the weight of the situation, I rummaged through my bag, searching for anything useful. My hand landed on a granola bar. The oats and honey tasted bland, like cardboard imbued with a hint of sweetness. Time started to play tricks on me. The flickering lights, the silence, and the sheer isolation blended into a disorienting mix. I couldn't tell if I'd been sitting there for minutes or hours. My wristwatch showed the time, but it felt meaningless. Each tick of the second hand echoed in my mind, amplifying the solitude that wrapped around me like a shroud. Then, a muffled sound caught my attention. It was coming from further down the platform. Irregular footsteps, as if someone were limping. I squinted into the darkness, making out a shadowy figure. Perhaps this person could help, I thought, getting up and walking closer. However, something felt off. The figure moved strangely, its shape morphing as it came into the light. It looked at me, or at least I thought it did, and I realized there were no eyes, just dark hollows. "Can you help me? Do you know the way out?" I asked, my voice shaking. It didn't respond. It just turned and walked, or perhaps floated, into the dark corridor leading to another platform. Sitting back down on the bench, I weighed my options, which were few. I was stuck in a place that made no sense, surrounded by things I didn't understand. I needed to find a way out, but how? There were no clues, no directions, just an endless labyrinth of decay. I decided my only option was to explore, to venture into the unknown corridors, no matter how ominous they seemed. Maybe I'd find another human. Maybe I'd find a way out, or maybe I'd just find more questions. But staying there wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, adjusted my bag, and stepped into the dark tunnel where the shadowy figure had disappeared. There was no turning back. As I navigated through the expansive station, I felt the weight of its decay. Cracked ceiling tiles hung precariously above me. Intermittent pools of water dotted the floor. Posters on the walls were torn and faded, advertising events and products that may have been popular years ago. The lights overhead were dim and inconsistent, offering just enough illumination to reveal the station's poor condition. Strangely, this decay didn't extend to the tracks themselves, which were devoid of the litter and debris that often filled unused spaces. I was not alone. Shadowy figures populated the station. Their outlines were indistinct and ever-changing. They occupied the nooks and recesses of the station, but they also seemed to permeate the air, as if they were both tangible and ethereal at the same time. They neither moved closer to engage me, nor retreated to avoid me. I singled out one figure that was somewhat closer than the others. It stood near a kiosk covered in dust and graffiti, its window, likely once used for ticket sales, now dark and filled with cobwebs. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I directed my voice toward the figure, feeling a mix of hope and desperation. My words bounced back at me, mingling with the ambient sounds of dripping water. But the shadowy figure didn't acknowledge me. There was no nod, no turning of its form to indicate it had heard me. My voice might as well have been as insignificant as the peeling paint on the walls. Though I was standing still, I felt like I was sinking further into the station's atmosphere of isolation. My own presence felt diluted, as though I was becoming as insubstantial as the figures around me. It was disorienting, like I was a lone signal lost in static. Even my own breathing started to sound distant, as if it wasn't entirely my own, but rather another layer of the station's peculiar soundscape. Frustration built within me. It was one thing to be in a strange, forgotten place, but it was another to be completely disregarded, as if my very existence was inconsequential. As I ventured deeper into the station, its complicated nature became increasingly evident. Corridors diverged in multiple directions, each offering its own set of challenges and oddities. One passage might have a floor strewn with debris, making each step precarious, while another could be flooded with an inch or two of standing water that reflected the sparse lighting. Graffiti covered some walls, spelling out words or phrases that I couldn't make out. Each corridor seemed to terminate at yet another platform, eerily similar to the one where I had arrived. The platforms themselves differed slightly. Some had wooden benches that were warped and rotting. Others were decorated with advertising posters that had aged and yellowed, their messages no longer discernible. Vending machines stood in some corners, their glass fronts cracked or completely shattered. The lighting varied dramatically. In some sections, I was in near complete darkness, save for the occasional sliver of light that came in from somewhere unknown. Other corridors were illuminated by flickering light bulbs hanging from frayed wires, casting erratic pools of light on the ground. These bulbs flickered as if struggling to maintain their glow. A pervasive sense of being followed gripped me. It was as though the station itself was watching me, mirroring my movements through the sound of my own steps. The notion that I was moving in circles became increasingly plausible, and the idea gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Just as my morale started to wane, a distant rumbling reached my ears. It grew louder, evolving into the unmistakable roar of a subway train. I can't describe the wave of relief that washed over me. Without a second thought, I retraced my steps, my pace quickening with each heartbeat. Finally, I arrived at a platform, panting, just as the train pulled in with a screech that grated against the tracks, but sounded like an orchestra to me. The train was vacant, and its interior lights were dim, but it didn't matter. As the doors slid open, I wasted no time. I stepped inside and made my way to an empty seat, its cushion torn but welcoming. The doors closed behind me, and with a jolt, the train lurched forward, carrying me away from the platform. After about 10 minutes, the train arrived at another station. The train doors slid open, and I was greeted by an atmosphere of neglect that surpassed what I had previously encountered. The platform tiles were cracked and chipped. Support columns showed signs of age and water damage, their paint peeling off in large strips. Graffiti was more abundant here, with scrolled messages and tags that were unintelligible. Rust covered the railings, benches, and even the large hanging clock, its hands stuck pointing at numbers that failed to form any time I recognized. Perhaps it was 12:53, but the rust obscured the numbers so much that it was impossible to be certain. It didn't match the darkness surrounding me. It wasn't noon or midnight. It was like this station existed in a time zone of its own. Stepping cautiously onto the platform, I scanned for some form of light, life, or the semblance of it. Like before, I found the station inhabited by shadowy figures. They lingered near walls and at the edge of the platform, their forms fluctuating between vague human shapes and abstract silhouettes. I couldn't tell if they were watching me, waiting for something, or completely indifferent. Their very existence blurred the lines between life and something else. They were here, yet not here. A paradox that only added to the unsettling nature of this place. Summoning a bit of courage, I tried again to communicate. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" I called out. As expected, there was no reaction. They were as oblivious to me as the others had been at the previous station. I considered my options. The idea of waiting for yet another train seemed futile, given the pattern so far. It was likely I'd just end up at yet another dilapidated station filled with more of the unresponsive, shadowy figures. On the other hand, the thought of remaining there in this eerie, rust-infused purgatory offered no comfort. I felt like I was caught in a loop. So the only feasible path forward was to dive deeper into the sprawling maze of tunnels that made up this subway system. Maybe the answer, or at least a clue to this madness, lay somewhere in the depths of these passages. I moved my bag to my shoulder, took a deep breath, and mustered what was left of my courage. I faced another dark corridor ahead, its entrance like the maw of some gargantuan creature. The walls were uneven and appeared moist, though it was hard to tell from a distance. The flickering lights above did little to cut through the darkness, but offered just enough illumination to suggest that the tunnel stretched far beyond what I could see. With another deep breath, I stepped forward into the unknown. I kept my eyes straight ahead and my steps as steady as possible, given the unpredictable terrain. This was it. I kept walking along the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. Overhead, bulbs flickered intermittently, creating a disorienting pattern of light and shadow. My eyes struggled with the abrupt changes in illumination. In one of the brief moments when a light flickered on, I saw something unusual. A crumpled newspaper lying in the corner where the wall met the dirty floor tiles. Curiosity drew me in, and I picked it up. Its texture felt brittle, yellowed by the passage of time. The edges were frayed, and the ink was faded, but still legible. My eyes darted immediately to the date, June 15th, 1982. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My heart raced as the implications sank in. This date was decades old. It didn't align with anything I could rationally expect. Confused and increasingly alarmed, I began to question the very fabric of this world I found myself in. Was this a time loop, where past, present, and future were all jumbled together? Or could it be time travel? Both ideas seemed fantastical, more fitting for a science fiction novel than my current reality. Yet the dated newspaper was real. I folded the newspaper carefully and tucked it into my bag. Every piece of evidence, no matter how confusing, could be crucial in understanding this strange place. That's when my eyes locked onto something on the wall. The words "exit point" stood out, scrolled in hasty, angular letters. Beneath the words, an arrow was drawn, pointing down a tunnel that diverged from the one I was in. The tunnel was dimly lit, but it was an indication, a clue that promised a way out of this place. My heart pounded even harder now, filling me with a mix of anticipation and dread. Could it be a trick? Despite my doubts, the promise of an exit point pulled at me. The thought of escape, of leaving this confusing and seemingly timeless maze injected a renewed sense of urgency into my veins. I adjusted the straps of my bag, my grip tightening around the fabric as if it were a lifeline in this strange place. Every decision felt heavy, laden with unknown consequences. But here was a sign, literally pointing me toward a possible way out. It was an opportunity I couldn't ignore. With a deep breath that did little to calm my racing heart, I followed the arrow. I stepped into the dimly lit tunnel, my eyes quickly adapting to the change in light. My pace quickened as I followed the graffiti's arrows and symbols. The walls around me changed as I went deeper. They seemed to age, the paint chipping more and the rust growing thicker. Even the air felt heavier, as if it carried the weight of the years or decades that had passed here. The tunnels themselves grew more complex. Passageways split off in confusing arrays, some descending into pitch blackness, others rising into poorly lit spaces. Lefts, rights, ups, and downs. I couldn't tell if I was making progress or just getting more entangled in this perplexing network. Yet, the graffiti never failed me. Its vivid colors and hastily drawn arrows served as my guiding stars in this underground night sky. And then, just when the tension started to turn into despair, I saw it. A large door stood at the end of the corridor. It was made of dark, weathered wood. Metal bands crisscrossed the wood, bolts and rivets holding everything in place. But what really captured my attention were the symbols carved into the wood and traced over the metal. Markings that mirrored the graffiti guiding me here. It was surreal to see these same signs on such an ancient-looking door. My heart pounded even harder now, filling me with a mix of anticipation and dread. My hand gripped the handle, and I gave it a pull. It didn't budge. Puzzled, I examined the door more closely and noticed a keyhole beneath the handle. I cursed under my breath. A key? Where was I supposed to find a key in this forsaken place? Suddenly, the shadowy figures, who had been indifferent to my presence all this time, were moving. I could see them drifting closer. Their focus was directed at me for the first time. It was as if discovering this door had disrupted some sort of equilibrium, and they were not pleased. I let go of the handle and stepped back, turning to scan the vast expanse of the tunnel system I had just traversed. The key could be anywhere, a needle in this subterranean haystack. The figure's silent observation prickled the back of my neck, urging me onward. With no direction to guide me, I chose a path at random, my steps quick and purposeful, trying to ignore the growing sense of being hounded by the silent watchers. As I walked, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of a key. My gaze darted from the shadowy nooks to the ceilings and down to the grimy floor, seeking anything that stood out. The path was littered with debris, discarded cans from broken bottles, and the occasional piece of furniture that had no place in a subway tunnel. I rummaged through the garbage, but I found nothing that resembled a key. The lights above were dim, their weak glow casting long, stretching shadows that played tricks on my eyes. Every so often, a light flickered, and my heart jumped at the sudden movement. But it was just the faulty wiring, or perhaps the station's way of showing its age and neglect. The corridor eventually spilled out into a wider chamber, and I was met with rows of old metal lockers against the far wall. I approached them, but as I got closer, I could see that most were rusted shut, their locks caked with grime and age. I pulled at the first locker, but it was sealed tight. The second and third were no different. I could hear the echo of my attempts bouncing off the walls, a chorus of clangs and bangs that grew increasingly frantic with each failed attempt. Finally, the fourth locker groaned in protest, but relented, its doors swinging open with a screech. Inside, there were nothing but a few pieces of moth-eaten clothing and a pair of work boots. My shoulders slumped in disappointment, but I pushed on, moving down the line of lockers. Locker after locker, I found more of the same. Empty or filled with useless junk, rusty tools, broken watches, damp, decaying books. Nothing that could be the key I so desperately needed. I couldn't give up, though. Then I noticed one locker slightly open, its lock broken. Inside, among a pile of old newspapers and discarded wrappers, there was a glint of metal. My heart leaped. Carefully, I reached in, my fingers brushing against the cold metallic object. It was a key, old and ornate, with an intricate design on its bow. This had to be it. I clutched the key tightly, feeling its teeth against my palm, and turned back towards the door. The shadowy figures remained stationary, but their attention was fixed on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just watching, but waiting for something. Perhaps for me to fail or succeed. I couldn't tell. With the key secure in my grip, I navigated back through the corridors. The figures lined my path, and I couldn't help but quicken my pace, spurred by the desire to leave their unnerving company behind. Breathless and sweaty, I arrived back at the door. Fingers trembling, I guided the key into the lock. I rotated the key, and as the tumblers within aligned, the sound of the releasing lock rang out. The door responded to my efforts, its hinges releasing a groan that reverberated down the tunnel. Light flooded over me. I squinted against the sudden brightness, taking a moment to let my eyes adjust. As my vision cleared, I was greeted by a scene that felt like a distant memory. The platform was pristine. The tiles glistened under the glow of well-placed lights. Posters on the walls were vibrant and whole, advertising events and services in bold, cheerful colors. People were scattered about. Some sat on benches. Others stood in small groups, absorbed in their own worlds. Nurse, reading books, tapping on the screens of their phones, or lost in conversation with each other. No one looked up as the door shut behind me. I moved with the flow of commuters, my feet carrying me toward the approaching train. Its bright lights and the sharp, electric scent of the rails were grounding. The doors slid open, and I stepped inside, finding a seat among the other passengers. Before I knew it, the train was pulling into my original station. I stepped off onto the familiar platform. I was back in the world I knew. People rushed by, and I stood there for a moment, just watching them. I exited the station and made my way home. The city was the same. The same cars honked in the streets, the same neon signs flickered in the twilight. But as I walked, every shadow from every alley felt deeper. Every unlit corner seemed to hold a secret. I reached my apartment and unlocked the door. I dropped my keys on the table and moved mechanically through the motions of returning to normal. Coat on the hook, shoes by the door. In the solitude of my own space, the silence was oppressive. There was nothing. No movement in the dark, no figures in the periphery. Just me. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the grime of the tunnels and the weight of the experience. The steam filled the room, and for a moment, I closed my eyes, just breathing. Afterward, I sat on the edge of my bed, wrapped in a towel, my mind replaying the events over and over. I knew I wouldn't sleep that night, maybe not for many nights to come. That's the end of today's story. I hope you liked it as much as I did. Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments, like and subscribe for new daily stories, and to support our channel. See you soon.